Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Iran. Another massive crackdown in Iran has been uncovered. This time, the Islamic State brutally murdered 1,700 dogs in a shelter. It was grotesque. Some of the best information we receive about what is happening inside Iran today comes from Expatriate, the community which is living outside of Iran. Despite the risk and the danger inherent in the communication of unflattering information to their friends and family who have escaped Iran, local Iranians continue to communicate and relay essential information about daily life. And, like the locals, the Iranian expat community is reeling over this organized attack against the dogs of Iran. As the community rightly points out, the Islamic leadership of Iran is heartless. They murder and they kill, and they use brutality as a means of governance. Iranian leadership, the expats explain, saps the love and pleasure out of life for Iranians. This massacre of dogs is just another example. The Jerusalem Post, which has covered the story extensively, quotes one expat who gives the context to the behavior of the ruling regime. Iranian-American journalist and human rights expert Banafsheh Zand is quoted as saying, "The Ali Khameneist regime main reason for insistent killing and promoting a culture of cruelty to animals in another way of depriving the Iranian people of joy or comfort that animals bring to humans. It's the old-fashioned irrational methods of control imposed by the authorities in the USSR or the Chinese Communist Party." This, by the way, is not the first time Iran has massacred dogs. In 2019, a similar event took place. During that massacre, 1,600 dogs were killed. It's an obvious observation. If Iran does not respect human life, why would they respect animal life? Perhaps you might reason, Islam has a negative approach towards animals. But no, that is not true. It's hard to conceive of a society where respect for animals is not considered a value. But in Iran, disrespect for animals is the official modus operandi. And it extends beyond stray dogs at shelters. In Tehran, let's say, in Iran in general, but in Tehran specifically, it's illegal to walk a dog in the park. In Islam, like in Judaism, there are strong textual values for respect towards animals. The entire process of food preparation is part of the value system. In order to eat an animal according to Islamic law, that animal must be properly slaughtered. That slaughtering process is called halal. Halal is defined as permissible or lawful in Islam. While it is similar to the slaughtering process that renders meat kosher, but they are not the same. As a point of interest, Muslims may eat meat that is slaughtered according to kosher standards, but those who only eat kosher cannot eat meat according to halal standards. It appears that Muslim leadership in Iran is running afoul of Islamic tradition. Not just dogs, but on all domestic animals. The Quran mentioned dogs several times and clearly permits their ownership. In Surah 5:4, it is written, "Lawful for you are all good things, and the prey that the trained hunting dogs and falcons catch for you." The brackets are there and are important in the Quran because the original Arabic does not write hunting dogs, it writes dogs. The brackets bring tradition and an assumed understanding into the translation. The idea is that trained dogs are permitted, whereas wild animals are not. They are not considered haram, forbidden. Today's leadership in Iran is indicating that both strays and domesticated dogs are a violation of Islam. But are not domesticated dogs trained? That should be a burning question, and surprisingly, in Islamic works, over the centuries, there has been very little discussion about this question, and it is puzzling. In the little discussion that does exist, there is a wide range of views on dogs in Islam. Often there's a differentiation between wild dogs and pet dogs, even discussing the saliva of dogs as to whether or not it is pure or impure. But there is ample evidence of Muhammad having a positive attitude towards dogs. There is, for example, the story of Muhammad, who, while traveling with his army to Mecca, posted sentries to ensure that a female dog and her newborn puppies were not to be disturbed. Another example is given of Muhammad and many of his cousins and companions praying in the presence of dogs. These were the first Muslims, and they owned dogs. During Muhammad's lifetime, the great mosque in Medina allowed dogs to roam freely. That practice continued for several centuries afterwards. Iran today, it's all about power. It's politics, it's control. Since the establishment of the Islamic Republic in Iran in 1979, the Islamic leadership has been reshaping and molding Islam to fit their conception, not the other way around. This is just another example. Owning a pet dog in Iran is a symbol of wealth, a symbol of success, Western success. So murdering dogs is a strong message from the top down, from Iranian leadership to Iranians who are westernizing and assimilating. Don't adopt Western traditions, they're saying. That includes having pets. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from YNET. It's entitled, Israel's Objective in West Bank is to Make Terrorists Feel Hunted. Subtitled, Analysis. Following a host of successful operations in terror hotbeds in Nablus, Jenin, and Hebron, which terrorists have claimed as their safe spaces, the IDF has implemented its strategy of deterrence in order to prevent future attacks. It's a very long subheadline, but it is very, very important. It was published on July 25th, 2022, and it's written by Yossi Yehoshua. The objective of the column is to explain why the IDF goes into the West Bank. We know being there endangers soldiers. So what is their objective? This is how the column begins. Although Palestinians claim the operations carried out by the IDF on Sunday in the West Bank city of Nablus and off the coast of Gaza failed to achieve their objectives, the military believes the case to be the exact opposite. The IDF says the objective of these operations was to make clear that Israel has its foot on the gas when it comes to thwarting terrorist activity, having slowed down during U.S. President Joe Biden's visit 2 weeks ago. The operation's overt objective was to seize weapons and arrest terror subjects, but its covert one was to make terrorists feel unsafe even in their safe space. Yehoshua describes the operation, and this is very important actually, feeling unsafe even in their safe space. So he describes what happened in it. The Israeli forces surrounded and fired rockets at 3 buildings where terrorists were barricading themselves. The terrorists began firing at the forces from the buildings, rooftops in response, prompting a further retaliation from the Israeli forces. Now, the conclusion that Yossi Yehoshua comes to is very clear. Yes, there was shooting, and yes, there was danger, but the operation was extremely successful. This is how he puts it. The forces entered the buildings following the gunfight and seized a large number of weapons and explosives. The Palestinians tried to claim the operation was a failure due to the successful escape of one of the wanted terrorist subjects. But the IDF says the main focus was deterrence. The IDF also operated in the town of Kabatia, where special forces arrested a number of suspects, and which has started to become overtaken by terror activity. We can't stop terror attacks only by closing Israel's West Bank separation barrier, an IDF officer said, adding, these operations are dangerous, but they're the IDF's mission. In Gaza, the Israeli naval forces foiled a maritime weapons smuggling attempt from Egypt. The forces sunk a Palestinian boat, which was estimated to have been carrying ammunition and anti-tank missiles. The IDF spokesperson's unit said the equipment was meant for Hamas. I'm glad Yossi Yehoshua took the time to explore this aspect of Israeli security and defense. It gave a clearer understanding of why the IDF operates and does what it does. Next up is a column from the Jerusalem Post, and it was written by Hussein Ibish, and it was published on July 31st, 2022. The column is entitled, Iran's Attempts to Play Saudi Arabia Against the U.S. Won't Work. Opinion, subtitled, The Partnership Between Washington and Riyadh may not be as strong as it once was, but it is clearly on the mend. The point of this column is to explain that Iran is working to move the Saudis into their court. It will not work, not because the United States will prevent it, but because the Saudis don't want it. This is how Hussein Ibish begins. With President Joe Biden having departed the Middle East, the region's two prime antagonists are thinking about just getting along. Iran and Saudi Arabia, having completed 5 rounds of talks in Iraq over the past year, both said recently that they were moving toward higher level negotiations on reconciliation. Paradoxically, this budding rapprochement between friend and foe offers important opportunities for Washington. After severing diplomatic ties following the January 2016 mob attack on the Saudi embassy in Tehran, the Riyadh government hoped sanctions on Iran by President Donald Trump's administration might produce a change in Iranian conduct. Instead, Iran became more aggressive than ever, culminating with a devastating missile attack on Saudi Aramco facilities in 2019. Ibish now explains that the United States remained quiet and that their lack of comment sent a loud message. The message was a message of weakness, and it occurred during the Trump administration. Ibish writes, the Trump administration, usually bellicose towards Iran, turned a blind eye, noting that no Americans have been killed. That proved a final straw for the Saudis. They were already upset that the Obama administration's 2015 nuclear deal with Iran ignored 2 main concerns: Iran's drone and missile arsenal, and its network of armed gangs in Arab countries including Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. The Saudis concluded that Washington was no longer reliable, and if they wanted their top security issues involving Tehran to be on the negotiating table, they were going to put them there by themselves. After the 2020 U.S. election, that realization dovetailed with Biden administration's encouragement for diplomacy over the use of force in the region. Now Ibish concludes his column. He writes that relations with the Saudis are on the mend. That is, the United States' relations with Saudis are on the mend, and that's an important distinction. What he wants to do is he wants to make certain that the United States and the Saudis are together, and he's actually identifying this issue. He writes, Iranian media are playing up Saudis' supposed enthusiasm for wide-ranging reconciliation, but in fact the Saudis remain highly skeptical. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia can give the Iranians a set of clear choices. They can have relations restored with the Saudis, a renewed nuclear agreement with Washington, and respect for legitimate security concerns, but only on reasonable terms, starting with curbing violence by regional proxies. The partnership between Washington and Riyadh may not be as strong as it once was, but it's clearly on the mend, and it's certainly still strong enough to be able to show Iran that it can't score cheap victories by trying to divide them. This piece, it's a little long, but it's well worthwhile. If you can go find it, it's really worthwhile. Thank you, Hussein Ibish. It was an excellent insight into the Middle East. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons and memes today, and 1 very funny video. Star Trek was one of the most influential shows on TV. Even though it only aired from 1966 to 1969, it influenced language, ideas, politics, social life. Think for a second about the spaceship. It was in the 1960s, and the crew on the bridge operating the starship was composed of people from all types, all colors, all places. They were white, black, Asian, Russian, Scottish, American, Vulcan, and they all worked together to fight evil. In this meme, Spock, who represents logic, asks, the adjective for metal is metallic, but not so for iron. Ironic? Humor about language does not get funnier than that one. Metal, metallic, iron, ironic? It's priceless. Next up is a meme that really shows the separation of experiences between generations. The meme reads, kids today will never know the struggles of landing that needle perfectly between 2 songs. There are so many experiences that are now simply lost. from dial tones to rolling down the car window. Next up is a classic difference between husbands and wives. She says, "I will ignore him all day so he knows I'm mad." And he's out riding the tractor in the field saying to himself, "What a nice, quiet day." That's funny. There are so many differences between the way in which men and women and husbands and wives see the world. The best explanation was that spectacular book from the 1990s titled "Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus." Keeping with this theme, here is that funny video that I mentioned earlier.
Fact of life, women always have more questions than men have answers to. Great example of this. 6, 7 months ago, I get a text one day. The text says, "Please pray for Tom. He was in a bad wreck." I walk into the kitchen where my wife is. I said, "Hey, I just got a text that said, please pray for Tom. He was in a bad wreck." She said, "Was he driving?" I said, "I don't know. I just got a text that said, please pray for Tom. He was in a bad wreck." "Were Carol and the kids in the car with him?" "I don't know. I just got a text that said, please pray for Tom. He was in a bad wreck." "Were the people in the other car hurt?" "I don't know. I just got a text that said, please pray for Tom. He was in a bad wreck." "What hospital did they take him to?" "I don't know. I just got a text that said, please pray for Tom. He was in a bad wreck." She said, "Well, you don't know anything. What do you know?" "I know you need to pray for Tom. I just got a text that he was in a bad wreck."
Next up is a news headline. I read the story when it happened and I was shocked. The headline is true. Chess robot grabs and breaks finger of 7-year-old opponent. You never think that this is what happens during a chess game of all things, but it does. Computers can get violent. Next up is a tombstone of an English teacher who, even in death, wants to make certain that people get use of language correctly. So they must use that language right. And the tombstone reads, "Here lies, not lays, Billy Woody Robbins, read." English teacher. He is correct, and this mistake is very common, and it is very funny. This next cartoon is about school. School security has changed since Uvalde. The children crossing the street observe and comment on the SWAT member holding up the stop sign for crossing. One says to the other, "New crossing guards this year." That's unfortunate, but we have to find humor in it. This last cartoon is a commentary on the news and the leadership of Europe. The weather forecast has a freezing snow everywhere along the screen. But the person who lives in the EU watching the weather report is so obviously boiling hot. His feet are in an ice bath. He's sweating and fanning himself. The sun is pounding through the window. What a critique of the difference between reality and the news. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. If you've been paying attention to reports from and about Iran, then you know that the Iranians are advancing toward nuclear capabilities at a very rapid rate. And one of the projects Tehran has undertaken is the dismantling of international watchdogs' equipment, specifically set up to monitor their nuclear development, their cameras. The International Atomic Energy Agency has admitted to having very limited visibility on what is happening. The IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, told the Spanish media outlet El País that Iran's nuclear program is moving at a very rapid pace. In June, Iran began removing essentially all the agency's monitoring equipment. That means videos, originally installed under the 2015 nuclear deal with world powers. At the time, Grossi said that the dismantling of the equipment by Iran could deal a fatal blow to chances of reviving the nuke deal following the pullout by the United States in 2018. Grossi told El País, "The bottom line is that for almost 5 weeks I have had very limited visibility with nuclear program that is galloping ahead, and therefore if there is an agreement, it is going to be very difficult for me to reconstruct the puzzle of this whole period of forced blindness." This is neither good news nor is it surprising. This is, however, the way Iran does things. Times are changing, and they're certainly changing. The United States is withdrawing troops from the Straits of Tehran. The people are being replaced. That is, the soldiers, U.S. soldiers, are being replaced with cameras. These cameras will monitor events and safe shipping lines traveling through the waters at the mouth of the Red Sea. The U.S. officials have announced that remote control cameras will take over the responsibility from US-led peacekeepers for ensuring the international shipping and the making sure that freedom of access to the Gulf of Aqaba remains open. The coastline of the Gulf of Aqaba is shared by Israel and 3 Arab nations. During his visit to Israel and Saudi Arabia, US President Joe Biden announced that the tiny multinational force and observers, the MFO, contingent on Tehran, which lies at the mouth of the Gulf, would be departing. Israel is skeptical about the feasibility of this new arrangement, but has not impeded the change in protocol. We just have to wait and see. Pro-Iranian hacker group Al-Tawriya announced that they had launched a cyber attack against Israeli targets. According to their claim, Al-Tawriya launched a cyber attack on soft Israeli sites. Al-Tawriya and Israel have a history. This is the same group that recently took down Israel's Airport Authority website. Israel has come under attack from many hacking groups. The most common modus operandi is for hackers to identify and then attack soft Israeli targets. The objective of these hackers is not merely to infiltrate Israeli targets. It's to show the world that Israel is vulnerable. That contrary to reputation, Israel, the startup nation, is not superior in computer technology. That they, the hackers, are better at their craft. The hackers want to inconvenience Israelis, and they want to make life difficult for Israelis, rather than to cripple the country. Making the distinction between soft targets and hard targets, by the way, has not been done. Vladimir Putin is on the warpath against Israel right now, it seems. Russia is shutting down the office of the Jewish Agency in Moscow. They are arresting Russians who did not declare their Israeli citizenship within 30 days of their arrival back into Russia. Russia's Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, said that Israel has taken a, quote, unhelpful stance towards Russia in the last few months. In her statement, Zakharova explained that Russia's issues with the Jewish Agency are legal rather than national. She also acknowledged that Israel's support of Ukraine raises questions. That's a quote, raises questions. During a TV interview, Maria Zakharova said, and again a quote, "It is up to Russia's Ministry of Justice to take a decision on the fate of the Russian branch of the Jewish Agency, which helps Jews emigrate to Israel," unquote. When asked about the fate of the Jewish Agency in Moscow, the spokeswoman responded, "It is a question for the Ministry of Justice. That's the information I have. It definitely is a legal matter." The Israeli-based Jewish Agency is the largest Jewish organization in the world. So this is a very important issue that needs to be resolved somehow. Time heals diplomatic wounds, so it seems. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman made his first trip to any European Union country since 2018 and the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The country he chose to visit on this maiden voyage is Greece. Bin Salman traveled with a large delegation composed of both government and business representatives. Included in the Crown Prince's itinerary was a meeting with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis and the signing of a series of bilateral investment and defense agreements. The EU in general, and Greece in particular, has much to gain from Saudi interaction and investments. In the end, business is more important than any other issue. Business triumphs above all else. Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid has called for the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Manuel de Oliveira Guterres to disband the United Nations Human Rights Commission of Inquiry. Lapid's request was the demand actually prompted by statements made by the Commissioner Milun Kathari on July 25th. He's quoted as speaking of the Jewish lobby has global influence and power. The commissioner also called for ousting Israel from the United Nations. The Committee of Inquiry, which is investigating an 11-day war between Israel and Gaza, has placed almost all blame on Israel. Milun Kathari is a professional within the United Nations. His expertise is in human rights and in housing. He actually has an undergraduate degree in architecture. The statements coming from him are no surprise. Milukthari has a long and established history of Jew hatred. There will soon be direct flights to and from Israel and Nigeria. The announcement was made during a meeting held in Jerusalem by both the Israeli Tourism Minister Yoel Razavoz and the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Christian Pilgrim Commission, Dr. Yakubu Pam. The meeting centered around the mutual benefit that will come to both parties with the opening of this new route. The route, a regular non-stop flight, is intended to provide direct service for Christians in Nigeria to visit religious sites in Jerusalem. According to Razavoz, roughly 50% of Nigerians are Christian. It will take a bit of coordination, but it is expected that both Nigerian Air and El Al will be providing the service. 2 years ago, the port of Beirut exploded. The explosion was equivalent to 10% of the power of a large nuclear bomb. It was so powerful that the explosion, that a major section of Beirut was literally destroyed, and windows were broken 15 miles away. The sound reverberated and smoke could be seen for tens of miles.
Oh my God!
Almost exactly 2 years later, to the day, silos in the port of Beirut have collapsed, and a large cloud of dust and smoke was seen in the area. This report comes from a witness, as reported by Reuters. Earlier in the month, a fire had been burning slowly in the ruins of the port's grain silos. The fire, which gave off an orange glow, was visible at night from nearby neighborhoods. Local Lebanese warned that the fires would cause the silos to collapse, but nothing was done to prevent the damage, not even squelching the fire. Something is rotten in the leadership of Lebanon. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Remember earlier we spoke and laughed about the tombstone on the grave of the English teacher? In Hebrew, the word for tombstone is matzeva. The word actually means pillar of stone, a monument intended to last a very long time, a monument erected as a commemoration. That's what the word means. There are several examples of this use of stone. They are worth talking about because we all erect these tombstones in memory of the people we love. In Genesis 28:22, Jacob says, "And this stone which I have set up for a pillar, a matzeva, shall be God's house." And in Genesis 31:13, God says to Jacob, "I am the God of Beit El, the house of God, where you anointed a pillar, a matzeva, and made a vow to me." The most important reference is from Genesis 35:20. Listen to this. Jacob set up a pillar upon her grave. That is a pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. This is why when we come to pay respects to the graves of loved ones, we place a small stone on their grave. Placing a stone is like erecting a small matzeva. Stones do not erode easily. The stone, like our memory of our loved ones, will be strong and lasting. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.